Hey everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. If you're new here, my name is Melissa and this channel is all about psychiatric drug withdrawal, reactions and recovery, and it draws on my 8 years of experience in this community and my own journey to recovery and the many conversations I've had with people both as a coach and just my time in this community. And I just cover topics and things that come up over and over again, and none of it is meant to constitute medical advice. It's just drawing on my experiences. So I'm in my living room again. I'm not in my usual spot where I record. I'm really enjoying my couch lately. So I wanted to talk about sensitivities in withdrawal. So mostly, actually, the focus of this video is going to be more on like sensitivities to taking things. I know there's many other sensitivities, but this is a really big one because there's obviously times in your life where you will need something. You will need potentially a supplement if something is very low, or you might need a surgery, or you might need antibiotics because the risk of not taking it, infections can spread and things can get dangerous very quickly. So this is a big one, and it's something that it was a horror show for myself as well, because I had developed not only sensitivities but fear, which I guess the two and two coincide in a lot of ways. Like your nervous system is over responding to things that are typically not, or typically never gave you any side effects before. And I think there's two parts to this. I think there's definitely your nervous system is overreactive. I mean, that is what is happening in withdrawal. But also there is an incredible amount of fear, understandably, because you've been traumatized by what's happened to you with these drugs, and then you've been involved in the online community, which tends to spread more and more fear, which is not always founded. It's based on people's experiences, which is okay, but it tends to evolve into this kind of groupthink, and you become paralyzingly afraid of everything. And I definitely went through this myself. And so how do you navigate when you need something? So for myself, here's what I did. So for one thing that I learned in this journey is that my body is a lot more capable than I ever believed, because I've been an autoimmune diabetic for almost 30 years. I was literally trained from a young age to believe that my body was defective, and that essentially it was unable to fight off infections like a normal person, which there's some truth to that for sure, but also I took it too far in my mind, just because I was so impressionable at the age I got diabetes, and it scared the crap out of me. So every time I had any sign of anything, I was running to the doctor, because I'm like, my body's defective, I'm immune compromised, I'll never be able to fight this. And one thing withdrawal taught me is that my body is a lot more capable than I ever gave it credit for. And so yes, I'm immune compromised, but I also do still have the ability to fight things and not run to the doctor. So I essentially put this to the test in my withdrawal, because I would really only ever go and get anything examined when it was getting really bad, or when the risk was high. So like a UTI, for instance, which can spread to the kidneys if it's not treated. And because of my diabetes, I never wanted to risk something like a UTI. But especially with things like sinus infections and other things that I used to just run to the doctor for every single time, I realized that there was home remedies. And this was through a lot of research. There's a lot of holistic health information. You have to sift through what's true and what's untrue, but you kind of get a general idea of things to try before you go and run to the pharmaceuticals. And so this is one thing that I really learned in my withdrawal. There are a lot of natural alternatives to pharmaceuticals out there when you're in a non-risky, I would say, like non-risky infection. Yeah, there's home remedies. And so that's what I really started to delve into and learn a lot about. And I was surprised and amazed throughout my journey how many times I could just treat things on my own. And of course, like I said, this involves research and looking into things, but things that I never even thought of before. Again, I just ran to the doctor. And so I got more strength and confidence in myself, because along with the withdrawal, I had felt my body had betrayed me years ago, because autoimmunity is literally the body attacking itself. And that is startling, especially when it happens at a young age. So you feel like your body has betrayed you for decades. And then withdrawal just adds on top of that, because so many of your symptoms are outside of your control. But again, even as someone who has other diseases, I really understood and learned that my body could heal itself from a lot of things. So that brought me comfort and strength and confidence in my journey. And so I learned, again, different ways of treating things, but I was always evaluating risk versus benefit. So again, when it was UTIs, I didn't really mess around with that. Although I have learned now, because I've become so self-aware since withdrawal, which tends to happen, I can tell when a UTI is potentially coming on, and I have found alternatives to antibiotics that work for me. And so yes, oftentimes or sometimes I will still go and get it tested just to make sure, but a lot of times like I can get rid of it through supplements that I now take. So I started very basic for a UTI as an example. I started with just cranberry juice, cranberry capsules. I know those are supposed to be kind of taken prophylactically for someone who's prone to UTIs, but it just gave me more confidence to be able to swallow anything like a pill. Even if it was just cranberries, it started to build my confidence and lessen my fear. And then I moved on to other things. And then obviously if it wasn't letting go, I then would have to figure out which antibiotic to take. But this was always very scary. And again, I was heavily doing risk benefit analysis in my journey. And I think everybody has to do that. And if there's something that you need to take, obviously the best course of action, if you can, is to start at a very low dose and work your way up. This lessens the chance of adverse reactions, but also builds your confidence and lessens your fear. Because again, when withdrawal happens and you're frantically searching for answers, you become and develop all of these other fears in the process. I've seen it again and again and again and experienced it myself. So if you start small and you're like, oh, I can tolerate this, and then slowly build up, this gives your body what it needs, and also it builds your confidence and lessens your fear toward taking things. So again, always a risk benefit thing. So when I was pregnant and ended up in a life-threatening situation, I had to take what I needed to take to save my own and my baby's life. And at that point, I was like, I don't care if my symptoms worsen. At this point, for me, I was just like, I guess I'm just going to have to deal with it. That was the attitude that I felt like I had to have when it was a life or death situation, because I wasn't willing to not take something in order to save my child. So that obviously is at the height of like risk benefit analysis. And I think too, again, and that you develop these sensitivities because of the state the nervous system is in, but you also can potentially develop a lot of nocebo effects. And this is a touchy subject for people, which I don't think it needs to be, because again, we're looking at, it's not about weakness of character. It's about the fact that you've been traumatized. Okay. So anything in the shape of a pill, I swear, even if you take a sugar pill, if you believe that it has side effects, you will develop side effects because of what you've been through. And so nocebo effects are a very real thing. And I've said this many times on this channel, look for repeated reactions, because there's so many times when I talk to people and they'll say, well, this one time I was able to do this and I had no reaction, and the next time I couldn't tolerate it. And in my mind, that's not a true reaction. A true reaction is you're having it every single time. If it's hit or miss, it's most likely a nocebo effect. You were maybe in a wave, in a more hyper-reactive state when you took it the time you reacted, as opposed to maybe you were feeling more safe, or in a window where your nervous system was in a more resilient, safe space, and so you didn't react that time. And so that's also important to keep in mind. But it's just like reinstatement, just like tapering, it's very slow and incremental typically when you have to put something, like take something that you are terrified to take. And you also have to look at what are the consequences of not taking this versus taking it, and you're doing that risk benefit analysis. It does feel like a nightmare, but it does get better and better and better. And I've shared on this channel, recently I had to take antibiotics, and this was in June, July, where I had to take like 4 different things, and I did have a reaction, but it was very short-lived, and I got back to regulation after about 24 hours. And so it really does improve over time, but I do think that part of recovery is challenging these things. Now, I'm not saying that you have to go and try a bunch of different things and drugs and supplements, no, but this also carries over into activities, people, places, foods, chemicals, cleaning, like everything. I do think that exposure therapy, for lack of a better word, is an important part of the recovery process. I actually saw on Benzo Buddies quite a long time ago someone asking the question, is it necessary to do exposure therapy in withdrawal? And someone commented, and I actually know the person who commented said, no, that's ridiculous. But I don't actually think it's ridiculous, because yes, people are having real reactions to these drugs, real withdrawal reactions with no preconceived notions that it could happen, such as myself. But I do think over time there are potential nocebo effects that develop and inconsistent reactions to things that need to be challenged. And that's when exposure therapy is very powerful, because again, we're not calling this anxiety, but we're calling it a sensitized nervous system state. And so facing your fears essentially and teaching your brain and nervous system that it is safe to do things in the normal real world again is important, especially if you're someone who had a severe journey, a long journey. I think it's even more so, and especially if you were really inundated in the community. Interestingly, I'm reading the book The Anxious Generation, which I think is a must read for all parents. It's about how the advent of social media and smartphones has literally rewired childhood and increased and created an epidemic of mental illness. It's a well-researched book, and it actually talks about studies that were done. I should read it, but I'm worried about copyright things. It talked about different studies where certain influencers who had a specific condition, who had large followings, the people following them were starting to then develop signs of that condition. So one that they talk about was Tourette's, which obviously is a pretty serious neurological disorder. And all of a sudden there was this influx of people visiting doctors and hospitals because they said, I think I've developed Tourette's. And they actually had the tics and all of the things, like the vocalizations associated with Tourette's, but it was almost like this groupthink, social contagion issue. And I'm not implying that withdrawal is a social contagion issue, but I do believe that when a bunch of people who are suffering get together and start sharing symptoms and sharing things that they've reacted to, it does create literally this kind of contagion where people, and you're developing it in a real sense, but it's not a true disorder in itself, if that makes sense. So like with the Tourette's thing, they were presenting as if they had Tourette's but didn't actually have Tourette's, based on these influencers and all of this exposure to people who had these things. It was very interesting. So I always just say be mindful of that and understand that exposure to all of these horror stories in a sensitized state can create things, real things. But those social dynamics and conversations are very powerful. And so anyway, I just wanted to say that. So exposure therapy, low and slow, risk versus benefit, looking for patterns of reactions. I think these are all very worthwhile. And I do think though, and researching alternatives, because I think this is happening a lot in women's health as well. And yes, obviously hormones have a huge impact on withdrawal and on women's lives. I mean, pregnancy and postpartum and menopause and all these things. But I do think, again, these are natural parts of life, natural stages that I think can be over-feared due to the overwhelming amount of information online. And so we're always, again, trying to weigh, do I need to treat this, or do I need to approach this as a natural life process and support my body as best I can, sort of from the bottom up, which is also what I talk about on this channel. Build a good, strong base of good health. Eat well, sleep when you can, move when you can, and you adjust these based on where you're at, but just try to support your body as best as you can and move through this and let it kind of run its course while supporting it throughout the way, if that makes sense. So one thing I forgot to add into this video that I'll splice in is you're always doing risk-benefit analysis, but also if you do have to take something, it's specifically a pharmaceutical, I like to look at things in sort of like a pyramid. So at the base of the pyramid are the least risky options, ones that tend to cause less problems in this community, and then up and up and up. And at the top of the pyramid would be things that are known to cause more side effects. They're more risky to take. And so you're also looking at it that way. So if you can't get around it, you have to take something least problematic at the least, like, lowest effective dose. That's what you're always looking to start at, and then working your way up if needed and necessary. Let me know your thoughts on this, questions, comments below. I think I just rambled a lot. I hope this made sense. Take care, you guys, and I'll see you next time. Bye.